27th of October this year, the World Trade Organization may have a new person at its helm, and that person may come from Africa, and the person will be a woman. If that happens, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala from Nigeria may be the first to lead the World Trade Organization that some see as a linchpin in trade arrangements in the world, and others see it as not so efficient. But what will be the significance of having an African, and a woman for that matter, to head the World Trade Organization? Welcome to this installment of On the Way to WTO with me, Abel Akara, teacher. With me today, I have to discuss this issue two guests, and they are all ladies. Ms. Daphne Mashile-Nkosi, she's executive chairperson of Kalagadi Manganese, that's a South African firm, and Ms. Judith Ameso, she's a trade policy expert at the African Trade Policy Center, which is lodged within the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, ECA, in Addis Ababa. You're welcome, ladies.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Abel. It's a pleasure to be on this program with you.
All right,
Yeah,
so
thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have been invited to this important debate.
all right. So according to ECA's economic report for Africa, that's the 2017 edition, Africa's global merchandise trade share is just about 2.4%. That figure in terms of its trade in services is just 2.2%. We're talking globally. Now, the UNCTAD's Economic Development in Africa report 2019 confirms this and even states that the value of Africa's trade in goods between 2015 and 2017 was just around 760 million US dollars. That's out of 17.3 trillion US dollars in terms of the global volume of trade in goods. This is pretty little in terms of what Africa offers in the global trading system. So someone will ask, what really, is the significance, or why should Africa bother with trying to get a top job at WTO? I put this question to you, Ms. Judith Ameso of the ATPC.
Thank you, Abel. First, let me express my pleasure that the next Director General of the WTO is not only likely to be an African, but also definitely a woman. I think this is already a win for marginalized groups in trade, that's Africa and women. So Africa has had a low participation in the WTO due to, among others, capacity constraints. And so the continent has not been able to negotiate on an equal ground with the more developed countries. This plays a role in how we benefit from the WTO. Essentially, limited or ineffectual participation in trade negotiations will most likely translate into limited benefits from the multilateral trading system. And so having an African head, the WTO would serve to highlight the issues that are of concern to Africans during negotiations. Secondly, this race comes at a time when Africa is concluding the African Continental Free Trade Area. An African Director General could play a role in helping the continent to realize this big dream for the continent, and in so doing, assist in integrating the continent as an important player in the multilateral trading system. The AFCFTA is aligned to the WTO, for example, in terms of its aims and parts of its rules. So the DG could garner more support for the continent, for example, through policy expertise and technical help. And I think this is why it is important for Africa to care about who gets the top job in the WTO. Of course, she would not only represent Africa, but it would be symbolically important for the continent as well.
Now, Ms. Ameso, the rest of the world, so to speak, might not necessarily be very interested in the fact that Africa progresses with the African Continental Free Trade Area. And here you're saying that if Africa gets the top job, it will help in leveraging the AFCFTA. How?
Sorry, please come again.
Yes, I was saying that the rest of the world, say the Americas of this world, the Europes of this world, the Asias of this world, the Oceanias of this world might not necessarily be interested in Africa's progress in terms of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And here you are saying that if Africa gets the top job at WTO, that will help to leverage the African Continental Free Trade Area. I was asking exactly how.
So the WTO already there's experience from the WTO in terms of implementing the rules and the policy that has come from the WTO. As I mentioned already, part of the rules and the aims of the AFCFTA are more or less similar to or aligned to the WTO. And so it offers importantly the WTO offers important lessons that the AFCFTA could borrow from in terms of how to implement the agreement, the kind of mistakes that were made, or, how it can improve in terms of the implementation of this African-owned agreement.
All right. So I come to you, Ms. Daphne Mashile-Nkosi. Tell me, is it some sort of birthright for Africa to now get the top job because everyone else has had their term? Is it logically Africa's time?
I think, yes, I agree with you. Africa's time is now. And I think it's about time that we claim our space in terms of world trade, simply because much of the raw materials that are actually making Europe, US and China tick is what comes out of us. The fact that this will be the first time a woman lead, that it's important for many reasons. And one of this, it advances the struggle for gender equality, not only in Africa, but right across the world. It further opens the possibility for the entrenchment of a gender perspective in global trade. And I would want to quote one of Africa's economists who said that you cannot fly, a bird cannot fly with one wing, but you have to fly with both. But also, if you look at the population of Africa and the fact that Africa is coming together to work together to make sure that we actually make Africa great again. It is common also knowledge that women constitute the majority of the world's citizens. They carry the most burden with respect to unpaid work. Trade rules could be fashioned in a way to help improve the conditions of world women's workers, producers and traders who feed into the global trading system. So for us, it's not only because it's Africa's time, but it's also the gender diversity issue.
So you're talking about bringing the gender perspective to the WTO. I agree with you totally, but you know that if we look at the trade configuration in Africa, which, like you've rightly said, is sort of a man's world. You had, a mining company, you are a woman, but it's also sort of a man's world, even though you're heading it. That's the formal sector. If you look at it critically, you see that where the women in Africa do have a place, in trade, it's mostly informal. How does this fit, with your vision that an African woman at the head of WTO is going to try and bring women to the fore, when women in our continent who are doing trading, especially cross-border trading, are mostly in the informal sector?
I think there have been attempts, and I think we are winning as women. I've been in the forefront of that from 2014, where we actually have come up with a gender diversity charter to actually ensure that women become not only in the informal sector, but the backbone of economies where we're coming from. And I think we've looked at two streams. One of those is the natural resources, because Africa is well endowed with that, and therefore they must actually go into those areas. And if I can make an example, mining and natural resources, which is oil and gas, that's where women must go into, simply because we do have a lot of natural resources. But the second one, that women must actually commercialize those aspects, it's agribusiness, because Africa has a lot of land, Africa has a lot of people. We might be actually overtaking China in terms of population in 2030, and therefore the time is now for Africa to produce food. And women, by nature, they actually are attracted to agribusiness because they have to feed their children, but also they feed society. They contribute towards education, healthcare, and all the softer things that people don't actually look at. And for me, it's all those things that will actually feed into Africa becoming a player in World Trade Organizations, not in terms of a 2%, but we can actually grow the percentage, and Africa can actually grow as well.
All right. So there are only two candidates that are left as we speak in the race for the Director General of WTO. You have the former finance minister from Nigeria. She had also been Minister of Foreign Affairs. She had been the managing director of the World Bank, like number 2 at the bank, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. And you have South Korea's Trade Minister, Yoo Myung-hee. These are all women. The lady from South Korea actually does work in trade. She's a trade expert. She's a trade minister. She has represented her countries in all kinds of negotiations for trade. And she says that this is the experience she's bringing to WTO, and that she can be a better broker to deal with the issues, for instance, that we're facing between China and the United States. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala from Nigeria, with a background from the World Bank, says, okay, I have not actually been doing business on trade specifically, but I have a bigger picture, and I'm coming with a fresh pair of eyes, to use our words. I'm putting this to you, Ms. Judith Ameso. Which of these arguments will fly? Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala was coming with a fresh pair of eyes, or Yoo Myung-hee, who actually is in the business of trade negotiations?
Thank you, Abel. I think both candidates do bring different experiences to the table, whether it's in terms of their political background or diplomacy or technical knowledge of trade policy. But what the WTO needs at this point is more a strong leader with the political muscle or influence to be able to broker negotiations among member states. You mentioned rightly the dispute between China and the United States. So we need a leader who will have the political influence to be able to address that conflict, but also command the respect of all the member states. Now, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, she brings a fresh pair of eyes, and I think sometimes that is good to bring a sort of perspective to an organization that she has not really been a part of, while the Yoo Myung-hee is, somebody who has been working in the trade circles and is aware of trade policy. But you have a secretariat that is able to give the backing in terms of the technical capacity or technical knowledge and support to whoever is at the helm of the organization. So I would be inclined to say that, perhaps we need somebody who does have the strong political background, but also who is new, so to speak, to the system, to inject some new blood into the WTO.
From what I gather, both the European bloc and the Americans till this stage have supported both candidates. Where do you think the pendulum will swing now that these two candidates were sort of their choice? I mean, this is a follow-up question to you, Ms. Judith Ameso.
Where do I think the pendulum will swing for the United States and the European Union?
Yes, for the United States and the European Union, in terms of, the weight that they bring into the system, and whoever they support might, just get the position. So they supported these two candidates. Do you think that the odds can sway in favor of Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala at this time? I mean, from Europe?
I think it's possible. There is an argument to be made that all continents have had a turn at the helm of the WTO, with the exception of Africa. So while the selection of the Director General is not on the basis of a rotational arrangement within the WTO, I think it would be fair that Africa does get a chance to lead the organization, but also. I go back to the background of diplomacy and political influence and the work that Okonjo-Iweala has done. I think, the chances are good and, would favor her.
Now, let's say that things get really tough. You know, there was a precedent that was set in 1999 when you had the New Zealand candidate, Mike Moore, and the Thai candidate, Dr. Supachai, who were vying. And, you know, the college of the college of voters, if I could call them voters, decided that they give both of them a chance. And so Mike Moore had a 3-year term of office, and Dr. Supachai had a 3-year term of office after that. Do you see this kind of scenario reoccurring, especially as everyone is clamoring, everyone from Africa, of course, that Africa has not had their chance, they must? Just in case the South Korean gets a little more of, if the scale tips a little bit in her favor?
Abel, is this a question to me?
Yes, it's a question to you, Judith. So, I mean, I repeat the question, that do you see the scenario repeating itself? If the scale is tipping in the favor of South Korea's Yoo Myung-hee, and everyone from Africa and maybe elsewhere is clamoring that this is, you know, the very first time that Africa can get their chance, do you see us reliving that scenario where two candidates do get the job and they split the term of office amongst them, like it happened in 1999?
I mean, it would be, it is a possibility. Anything really is a possibility at this point. But from my last readings, it seemed Konja-Iweala had garnered about, had garnered support from, I think, more than half of the WTO membership. But yes, it is a possibility, although there's also the likelihood that it could be put to a majority vote. That is something that has not happened in the history of the WTO before. But I mean, if there's a stalemate, then it's definitely something that could be considered.
Ms. Mashile-Nkosi, you know, the trade war between the US and China has really put WTO in a bad state in terms of its reputation. What will an African, you know, bring to the table to try to restore this reputation?
Can you repeat the question?
I was saying that the WTO has a reputational crisis at the moment. As you know, observers from around the world are saying they've not been able to broker between China and the US in their standoff, their trade standoff. What do you think an African, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, can bring to the table to try and restore this reputation of the WTO?
I think the fresh eyes scenario into the world trading system is what is going to actually coming with fresh eyes, not tainted by the trade war between the two, but also the noises that have been coming to WTO, you know, the criticism around WTO, the fact that they are not addressing the needs of developing countries. He's bringing that to give, you know, credibility to the organization, but also, you know, if you're sitting on one side of the fence, you can actually see that you are bringing someone who's actually right in the middle, because Africa has never really been taken seriously by WTO, and therefore it's about time that they actually look for a fresh start. Some people or someone who is actually had never been part of the challenges or the fight between China and the US, who will not take sides. And I think Africa is placed right in the middle. And therefore, I see our sister from Nigeria, who's tried and tested, doing that. And she's got a lot of support. I agree with Judith that we've been tracking, we've been gaining support, we've been mobilizing for her, because of course, we would want Africa to actually take the lead.
Ms. Ameso, would this not be considered a sort of poison gift? Look at what is happening to the World Health Organization, led by an African, and all the critiquing that has happened because of his leadership. An African here is moving into troubled waters. of the WTO